The alien trading outpost was a cacophony of voices, machinery, and harsh lights. Merchants shouted to advertise their wares, everything from rare minerals to exotic creatures. And the air was thick with the scent of spices and oil. Amid the chaos, a small stage stood in the center of the market square, its wooden platform worn smooth by countless transactions. Today, it held an unusual prize. Kyra stood on the platform, her wrists bound with shimmering metal cuffs. Her deep violet skin and silver hair caught the light, making her stand out even among the crowd of aliens that had gathered to watch. She lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear bubbling inside her. Her family's betrayal still stung, a desperate attempt to clear their debts by selling her to the highest bidder. They hadn't even looked her in the eyes when they handed her over. The auctioneer, a reptilian creature with a long snout and a booming voice, gestured toward Kyra with one clawed hand. A rare find. He bellowed. Strong, intelligent, and capable of serving in any capacity. Bidding starts at 10,000 credits. The crowd murmured, their eyes appraising her like she was no more than livestock. Kyra's fists clenched. She hated the way they looked at her, as if her worth could be measured in credits. On the edge of the crowd, Captain Ryan Hayes adjusted his jacket and frowned. He hadn't come to this place for trouble. He was only here to refuel his ship and restock supplies. But when his gaze fell on the stage, he froze. The girl standing there didn't look like she belonged among the usual slaves and criminals sold in places like this. Her posture was proud, her eyes defiant, and there was something about her that struck a chord deep within him. Ryan's military instincts kicked in. He recognized the look of someone trapped, someone desperate for a way out. His fists tightened at his sides. Slavery was a practice he despised, one of the reasons he'd left his home planet to explore the stars. But this wasn't his fight. He told himself to walk away, to stick to his plan, and leave the outpost as soon as possible. And yet, he didn't move. The bidding began, the price climbing higher and higher as wealthy merchants and mercenaries competed for her. Kyra's heart sank with each shout, knowing that her fate was slipping further out of her control. She scanned the crowd, searching for, she wasn't sure what. Hope. A miracle. Then she saw him. A human, standing apart from the others, his brown eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her pause. He didn't look like the others in the crowd. There was no greed in his gaze, no leering. Instead, he looked angry. The auctioneer's voice rose. 30,000 credits. Do I hear 35? Ryan stepped forward. 40,000, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The crowd turned to look at him, surprised. The auctioneer grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. A bold bid. 40,000 credits. Any higher? The crowd fell silent. The price was steep, even for someone as unique as Kyra. The auctioneer pounded his gavel. Sold. To the human. Kyra was led off the stage, her mind racing. Who was this man? And what did he want with her? As the guards handed her over, she looked up at Ryan, trying to mask her uncertainty with a glare. Why did you do that? She demanded. Ryan shrugged, unlocking her cuffs with a small device. Because no one deserves to be treated like that. You're free now. Kyra blinked, stunned. Free? She hadn't expected that. But before she could say anything, Ryan grabbed her arm gently and pulled her toward the shadows. We need to move. They won't like losing their prize. For the first time in days, Kyra felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human was her way out of this nightmare. The outpost had turned chaotic. Merchants and customers carried on with their business, but Ryan could feel the tension in the air. Losing a prize as rare as Kyra wouldn't sit well with the slavers, and he knew they wouldn't let her go without a fight. He tightened his grip on her arm, leading her through the maze of market stalls. Kyra struggled to keep up, her mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. This human, Ryan, as he'd introduced himself in a rushed whisper, had spent an exorbitant amount of credits to buy her freedom. She didn't know whether to trust him or run, but the urgency in his movements told her one thing. They were in danger. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice sharp but low. Ryan glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of pursuit. "My ship. It's parked in the lower docking bay. We need to get there fast." Kyra pulled her arm free, glaring at him. "And what then? You expect me to just follow you? How do I know you're not another slaver?" Ryan stopped, his gaze softening for a brief moment. "I didn't risk my neck and spend 40,000 credits to sell you again. You're free, Kyra. I just want to make sure you don't end up back in chains." Her expression faltered, but before she could respond, a shout rang out behind them. There they are. A group of armed slavers was pushing through the crowd, their weapons gleaming under the harsh lights of the outpost. Ryan cursed under his breath. No time for this. Run. Without waiting for her response, he grabbed her hand and took off. Kyra hesitated only for a second before following. The slavers were close, their heavy boots pounding against the metal floor. The outpost's narrow corridors and twisting paths gave Ryan and Kyra a slight advantage. But the slavers knew the layout better. "Keep moving," Ryan barked, ducking into an alleyway between two towering buildings. Kyra stayed close, her breathing ragged. Despite her anger and confusion, she couldn't deny that Ryan was her best chance of survival. The alley led to a quiet docking bay, the air filled with the hum of idling ships. Ryan's vessel stood near the edge, a small but sturdy craft with the name Starfire painted across its hull. He hurried to the ramp, slamming his palm against the control panel to lower it. "Get inside," he shouted, turning to face the alley. Kyra hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run in the opposite direction. But the sound of the slavers closing in made her decision for her. She sprinted up the ramp, the metallic clang of her footsteps echoing inside the ship. Ryan followed, hitting the controls to raise the ramp just as the first slaver appeared. A blast from their weapon struck the hull, but the ramp sealed shut, and Ryan sprinted to the cockpit. Kyra followed him, her heart pounding. "What now?" she asked as she stumbled into the cockpit. Ryan was already at the controls, flipping switches and powering up the engines. "Now we get the hell out of here." The Starfire roared to life, its engines vibrating beneath them. Outside, more slavers had gathered, firing at the ship, but Ryan wasn't concerned. The craft lifted off, the thrusters kicking up dust and debris. Within seconds, they were soaring through the atmosphere, leaving the outpost behind. As the ship stabilized in the vast emptiness of space, Ryan leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. "We're clear. For now." Kyra stood behind him, her arms crossed. "You keep saying I'm free, but I'm still here. What do you want from me?" Ryan turned to face her, his expression calm but firm. "I don't want anything. But I've been in situations like yours before, and I know how dangerous it can be out there. You're welcome to leave if you want, but at least let me drop you somewhere safe." Kyra studied him, her distrust slowly giving way to curiosity. "Why do you care?" Ryan shrugged. "Because I can, and because no one else will." For the first time, Kyra felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She wasn't ready to trust him completely, but for now, she would stay. She had no choice but to see where this journey would take her. The hum of the Starfire's engines filled the quiet space as it drifted through the vastness of the galaxy. Kyra sat in the corner of the ship's small lounge area, her arms wrapped around her knees. She still didn't trust Ryan, but she had to admit he had saved her life. For now, she was stuck with him, whether she liked it or not. Ryan entered the room, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Here," he said, setting one down on the table near her. "It's not much, but it's warm." Kyra hesitated before reaching for the mug. The aroma was unfamiliar, but comforting. She took a small sip and was surprised by the sweetness. "What is this?" "Human drink called tea," Ryan replied, sitting across from her. "Good for calming nerves." She snorted softly. You think a cup of tea will fix everything. I was sold by my own family, chained, and almost dragged back by slavers. Tea doesn't solve that. Ryan leaned back, studying her. You're right. Tea doesn't fix anything. But it's a start. Kyra frowned, unsure how to respond. She hated how calm he seemed, like he had everything figured out. Why did you help me? She asked after a long silence. You could have walked away. Ryan shrugged. I've seen enough people lose everything. I wasn't about to let it happen again, especially not to someone who still had fight left in them. Kyra's gaze softened, but she quickly masked it. Don't think I owe you anything. I didn't ask to be saved. Not asking you to owe me, Ryan said simply. But if you want to stay alive, we need to work together. The ship jolted slightly, pulling their attention to the cockpit. Ryan stood, motioning for Kyra to follow. We're passing through a trade route. I need to make sure no one's following us. Kyra hesitated before trailing after him. In the cockpit, the glowing monitors displayed a scatter of ships in the distance. Ryan adjusted the controls, his brow furrowed in concentration. Are they slavers? Kyra asked, her voice tense. Doesn't look like it, Ryan replied. Just merchants, but we can't be too careful. Kyra watched him work, her curiosity growing. She'd never met a human before, and Ryan was nothing like the stories she'd heard. He was calm, focused, and surprisingly kind, but she wasn't ready to let her guard down. What's your plan? She asked. Ryan glanced at her. First, we find a safe port where you can decide your next move. After that, it's up to you. And if I don't have a next move? Kyra's voice was quieter now, almost vulnerable. Ryan's expression softened. Then we figure it out, together. As the ship continued its journey, Kyra began to explore. The Starfire was small but well-maintained, with a mix of human and alien technology. She found herself in the cargo hold, where crates of supplies were stacked neatly. Among them, she spotted a toolbox and a half-finished device. You're an engineer? She asked when Ryan joined her. Kind of, he said, sitting on a crate. Picked up a lot of skills over the years. Keeps the ship running. Kyra picked up a small tool, turning it over in her hands. I used to build things too. Back home. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What kind of things? Mostly small devices. My family. They said I was wasting my time. Her voice faltered, the memory of her betrayal still fresh. Well, they were wrong, Ryan said firmly. You've got skills. Might come in handy. Kyra looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something other than anger or fear. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human wasn't like the others she'd met. As the day turned to night, Ryan set the ship to autopilot and joined Kyra in the lounge. They sat in silence, the stars outside the window casting a faint glow over the room. I don't know what's next, Kyra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan looked at her, his expression steady. You don't have to figure it all out now, but whatever happens, you're not alone. For the first time in weeks, Kyra felt the weight on her chest lift just a little. She didn't trust him completely yet, but for now, that was enough. The days aboard the Starfire passed in a cautious truce. Kyra kept to herself for the most part, exploring the ship and piecing together its layout. She was no stranger to machinery, and she found the ship's blend of human and alien technology fascinating. She didn't ask Ryan for permission to tinker with small broken components she found in the storage bay, but he didn't seem to mind. Ryan, on the other hand, remained busy at the controls, ensuring they stayed off any major trade routes to avoid drawing attention. He noticed Kyra's hesitance to engage but respected her space. Trust, he knew, wasn't something earned overnight, especially not from someone who had been betrayed by the people closest to her. One evening, the quiet hum of the ship was interrupted by a loud clank from the engine room. Ryan bolted from the cockpit, finding Kyra crouched beside an open panel, tools scattered around her. She was focused, her silver hair tied back as she adjusted a tangle of wires. "Care to explain what you're doing?" Ryan asked, crossing his arms. Kyra didn't look up. "Your energy converter was inefficient. I'm recalibrating it." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think to ask first." She shrugged, still working. "You said I should make myself useful." He sighed, kneeling beside her to inspect her work. To his surprise, the adjustments she'd made were precise, her knowledge evident in the way she handled the tools. "You're good at this," he admitted. Kyra finally glanced at him, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "It's what I did back home. Before everything." Ryan nodded. "Well, keep at it. Just don't blow up my ship." A faint smile tugged at Kyra's lips, though she quickly hid it. No promises. The next morning, Ryan woke to find Kyra already in the cockpit, her fingers skimming over the navigation console. She had plotted a new course, one that bypassed a known slaver territory. "You're learning the system," Ryan said, impressed. Kyra turned to him, her expression guarded. "I don't want to be caught off guard again." Ryan nodded. "Fair enough. You're starting to act like part of the crew." "I'm not part of anything," she replied sharply, though her tone lacked its usual bite. "I'm just surviving." "Fair enough," Ryan said, sitting in the pilot's chair. "But if you keep fixing things and plotting better courses, I might start thinking you're sticking around." Kyra didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. She didn't trust him fully yet, but she was beginning to see the value in their uneasy alliance. Their fragile partnership was tested when the Starfire's sensors picked up an unidentified ship following them. The vessel didn't broadcast any identifiers, which only made Ryan more suspicious. "Slavers?" Kyra asked, her voice tense. "Probably," Ryan replied, his hands moving quickly over the controls. "We're not going to wait and find out." The ship jolted as Ryan pushed the thrusters to maximum, veering off their planned route. The pursuing ship followed, its weapons firing sporadically. Kyra gripped the edge of her seat, her heart racing. "What can I do?" she asked, surprising even herself. Ryan glanced at her. "The turret. Can you handle it?" Kyra hesitated, then nodded. "Tell me where." He pointed to a ladder leading to the upper deck. "Follow the hallway. The turret's controls are at the end. Aim for their engines." Kyra bolted up the ladder, her fear overridden by determination. She reached the turret controls, her hands shaking as she activated the system. The targeting screen lit up, showing the enemy ship closing in. "Just breathe," she muttered to herself, locking onto their engines. She fired, the turret's recoil vibrating through her hands. The first shot missed, but the second struck true, hitting one of the ship's thrusters. It spun out of control, falling behind as the Starfire surged ahead. When the danger had passed, Kyra returned to the cockpit, her face flushed. Ryan turned to her with a rare smile. "Nice shot." She sat down, her breathing still uneven. "Don't get used to it. I'm not a soldier." "Could have fooled me," Ryan said lightly. "You did good." For the first time, Kyra felt a sense of accomplishment. She had helped, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. And for the first time since her escape, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Belonging. The Starfire cruised through the vast, empty expanse of space. The enemy ship was long gone, but the tension from the encounter still lingered. Kyra sat in the lounge, staring at the tool in her hand. She had barely slept since firing the turret. The rush of adrenaline had faded, leaving her with a mix of pride and uncertainty. She wasn't a soldier, but in that moment, she had acted like one. Ryan entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Tea," he said simply, setting one down in front of her. Kyra raised an eyebrow. "Is this your solution for everything?" Ryan smirked. "It works, doesn't it?" She picked up the mug, letting its warmth seep into her hands. "You really think we're safe now?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "For now. But in this part of the galaxy, safety's always temporary." Kyra took a sip, the familiar sweetness calming her nerves. "You didn't have to teach me how to use the turret, you know." "Didn't have a choice," Ryan said. "If we were going to make it out of that alive, I needed you." His words surprised her. She wasn't used to being needed. For most of her life, she had been dismissed, her skills seen as a waste of time. But here, on this ship, she was starting to feel useful. Later, Kyra found herself back in the engine room, tinkering with one of the ship's systems. The rhythmic hum of the engines was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of control. Ryan appeared in the doorway, watching her work. "You've been busy," he said, nodding toward the newly calibrated energy converter. "It was inefficient," Kyra replied without looking up. "I fixed it." Ryan chuckled. "You're going to make this ship run better than when I bought it." She glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "Maybe you should start paying me." He grinned. "Maybe I should." That evening, as the ship drifted through hyperspace, Kyra joined Ryan in the cockpit. The stars streaked past the window, their light reflecting in her silver eyes. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Miss what?" Ryan asked, keeping his eyes on the controls. "Your home. Your people." Ryan hesitated, then shrugged. "Sometimes, but Earth wasn't exactly kind to me. I left because I didn't fit in. Out here, I can make my own way." Kyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know what that feels like. My family, they never understood me. They only saw what I couldn't do, not what I could." "Well, their loss is the galaxy's gain," Ryan said, glancing at her with a faint smile. "You've got talent, Kyra. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her chest tightened at his words. No one had ever said that to her before. She looked at him, studying his calm demeanor. For all his rough edges, Ryan had a way of making her feel seen. As the hours passed, their conversations grew deeper. They shared stories of their pasts, their struggles, and their dreams. Kyra found herself laughing at Ryan's dry humor, and he seemed genuinely interested in her tales of tinkering and invention. For the first time since her escape, Kyra felt like she wasn't alone. Ryan wasn't just a rescuer. He was becoming something more. A friend. Maybe. She wasn't ready to define it yet. By the time they reached their next destination, the tension between them had eased. Kyra still didn't fully trust him. Trust wasn't something she gave easily, but she was starting to believe in his sincerity. As the Starfire approached a small, bustling port, Ryan glanced at her. "Ready to stretch your legs?" Kyra smirked. "Ready to make sure you don't get us into more trouble." Ryan laughed, and for the first time in a long time, Kyra felt a flicker of hope. Together, they might just make it through this chaotic galaxy. The Starfire docked smoothly at the bustling spaceport. The city stretched as far as the eye could see, its towering buildings glittering under the artificial lights. The hum of ships and the chatter of merchants created a cacophony of sound, making it easy for someone to get lost or to hide. Ryan glanced at Kyra as they exited the ship. "Stay close. Ports like this aren't exactly friendly to strangers." Kyra adjusted the hood of her cloak, pulling it over her silver hair. "I'm not planning to wander off." Together, they navigated the crowded market streets. Ryan needed supplies, and Kyra tagged along, her sharp eyes scanning the stalls. She couldn't help but notice the variety of alien species around them, some familiar, others completely foreign. Yet, no one paid her or Ryan much attention. It was a welcome change from the slavers' outpost. At one of the stalls, Ryan haggled with a merchant over spare parts for the Starfire. Kyra wandered a few steps away, drawn to a display of intricate mechanical trinkets. She picked up a small device, its gears clicking softly as she turned it over in her hands. "You've got a good eye," the merchant behind the stall said, his voice gruff. "That's a precision calibrator. Rare piece." Kyra nodded, intrigued. "How much?" "More than you can afford, kid," the merchant said with a smirk. Before Kyra could respond, Ryan appeared, placing a few credits on the counter. "We'll take it." Kyra blinked, surprised. You didn't have to do that. Ryan shrugged. Consider it an investment. You seem to have a knack for fixing things. She gave him a small smile, tucking the device into her pocket. Thanks. As they made their way back to the ship, Ryan's relaxed demeanor suddenly shifted. His hand moved to the blaster on his hip, his gaze scanning the crowd. What's wrong? Kyra asked, her voice low. We're being followed, Ryan said calmly. Don't look back. Just keep walking. Kyra's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay composed. Who is it? Could be slavers, Ryan replied. Or someone looking for trouble. Either way, we're not sticking around to find out. They turned down a narrow alley, the noise of the market fading behind them. Ryan led Kyra through a series of winding paths, his familiarity with ports like this evident, but their pursuers were persistent. A shadow darted ahead of them, cutting off their path. Ryan stopped, his blaster drawn in an instant. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their weapons glinting in the dim light. Well, the leader said, a scar running down his cheek. Captain Hayes. Fancy seeing you here. Ryan's jaw tightened. Not interested in whatever you're selling, Drax. Move. The scared man, Drax, chuckled. Oh, I'm not selling. Just collecting. Word is, you've been causing trouble for some powerful people. That girl with you. She's worth a fortune. Kyra stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife she had hidden under her cloak. She's not for sale, Ryan said, his voice cold. Now, back off. Drax sneered. You're outnumbered, Hayes. Hand her over, and I might let you walk away. Ryan didn't hesitate. Not happening. Before Drax could respond, Kyra acted. She threw her knife with surprising precision, striking one of Drax's men in the arm. The man yelped, dropping his weapon. Ryan used the distraction to fire his blaster, the shot grazing Drax's shoulder. Run, Ryan shouted, grabbing Kyra's arm. They sprinted through the alley, the sound of blaster fire echoing behind them. The docks came into view, and Ryan pushed Kyra ahead. Get to the ship. Kyra didn't argue, her feet pounding against the metal floor as she raced up the ramp. Ryan followed, slamming the controls to seal a hatch. The Starfire roared to life, its engines shaking the ship as they lifted off. Safe in hyperspace, Kyra sat in the cockpit, her breathing uneven. Who were they? She asked. Old enemies, Ryan said, his tone grim. Drax runs with slavers. They've been after me for a while. You were just an excuse. Kyra looked at him, her eyes sharp. You didn't have to protect me. Yes, I did, Ryan said firmly. Because that's what allies do. For the first time, Kyra felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Trust. Ryan had risked his life for her. Again. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was starting to believe in him. The silence of hyperspace felt heavier than usual as the Starfire cruised far from the hostile spaceport. Kyra sat in the cockpit, staring out at the streaking stars. She had always thought space was vast and empty, but now it felt alive, filled with danger, opportunity, and the unknown. Ryan entered, a bandage wrapped around his arm from the minor burn he'd received in the skirmish. He placed a small data pad on the console and leaned back in the pilot's chair. You handled yourself well back there, he said, breaking the silence. Kyra glanced at him, unsure how to respond. I didn't have a choice. They would have taken me. You had a choice, Ryan replied, his tone calm. You could have frozen, but you didn't. You fought back. She looked away, the compliment unsettling in its sincerity. I'm tired of running, she admitted. I don't want to be someone who's always looking over her shoulder. Ryan nodded. You're not the only one. That's why I left Earth. I wanted to make my own path. Out here it's hard, but at least it's my choice. Kyra studied him for a moment. For all his gruffness, Ryan had a way of cutting through her defenses. And what now? Drax and his men won't just forget about us. No, they won't, Ryan said. But we're not staying in one place long enough for them to catch us. I've got a few ideas for safe spots we can lay low. Later, as the Starfire drifted through hyperspace, Kyra found herself back in the engine room. The familiar hum of the machinery soothed her nerves. She tinkered with the small device Ryan had bought her, the gears clicking softly as she worked. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of control in a galaxy that seemed determined to strip her of it. Ryan appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed. Still working on that? It's almost done, she replied without looking up. It's a signal disruptor. If we ever get tracked again, this might buy us some time. His eyebrows raised in surprise. A signal disruptor? Impressive. Kyra shrugged. Like I said, I don't want to keep running. Ryan smiled faintly. Good, because I think we make a decent team. The next day, the Starfire exited hyperspace near a small, lush moon. Its surface was covered in greenery, dotted with lakes that shimmered under the light of the twin suns. Ryan pointed to a clearing near the largest lake. We'll touch down there. It's quiet, off the grid. We can regroup and figure out our next move. As the ship landed, Kyra felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't worried about who might be chasing her. Together, she and Ryan unloaded supplies and set up camp near the water's edge. That evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon, Kyra sat by the fire they had built. The flickering flames reflected in her silver eyes as she glanced at Ryan. "Why do you keep helping me?" she asked. Ryan poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "Because I've been where you are. Lost, betrayed, not knowing who to trust. Someone helped me once, and it changed my life. Now, it's my turn." Kyra nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long feeling abandoned, but here, under the stars, she felt something different. She felt seen. As the fire crackled, Ryan handed her a ration pack. "You've got skills, Kyra. You're smart, resourceful. You could do a lot out here." "And what about you?" she asked, her voice softer now. "What do you want?" Ryan smiled faintly. "To keep flying. To help where I can. And maybe, to have a little peace for once." Kyra looked at him, the flicker of trust she'd felt earlier growing stronger. "Then maybe we can figure this out together." Ryan raised his ration pack in a mock toast. "Here's to making our own path." For the first time in weeks, Kyra smiled. A real, genuine smile. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for now, she had a ship, a purpose, and an ally she could finally trust. Together, they would face whatever the galaxy threw at them. And for the first time in a long time, Kyra felt hope.